You're listening to the Digital Deep Dive, where we tackle the newest trends, strategies, and pain points shaping growth across the digital landscape. From Amazon and D2C to international expansion, join our host and e-commerce leaders across multiple industries for in-depth discussions on how to maximize your brands in the digital arena. Now, here's your host, Aaron Conant.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Digital Deep Dive podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Conant, and today we are going to talk about joint business plans. The good old JBP, which I think a lot of you know has changed drastically over the past decade. Got some great longtime friends of the network as a whole. Done a lot of stuff now with Lauren, with Nate. So much fun. They agreed to jump on and kind of let me pick their brains for a while. And they've got a lot of research in this space. A joint report they put out together, and it's going to be fun to kind of pick it apart. But Lauren, ladies first, I'm going to kick it over to you. If you want to do a brief intro on yourself, Digital Self Institute, that would be great. And you can kick it over to Nate, and then we'll jump into the conversation. Does that sound good?
Sounds good. Thanks, Aaron. Excited to be back. Love the
I know, right?
Connection. Yeah, like the circle of connections that have brought us all together. It's really kind of beautiful and unique. So I love it. So nice to meet everyone. Lauren Livak Gilbert. So I lead the Digital Shelf Institute, which is a commerce community for digital leaders across the space. We cover pretty much every industry. We focus on creating thought leadership and partnering with people like Nate from Microsoft Advertising to help you figure out what's happening, what are some of the challenges, how can you fix them, work through them, what are the frameworks, what are the best practices. So really looking forward to diving into JBP. Nate, pass it to you.
Great. And also delighted to be back and hanging out with the both of you live and not quite in person, but digitally here, which is in line with Digital Shelf Institute. So I'm Nate Pinkston. I'm at Microsoft Advertising. I lead growth for Microsoft Retail Media. And so we are one of the channels that brings retail media to life for a number of retail media networks across the world. And we are excited to basically help offer our perspective, having seen a lot of retail media networks, to help dig into what helps and what can retailers do to help brands be more effective in this space and get more out of their advertising spend. Retail media is growing, evolving, and I think we'd all like to see it work a little bit better for everybody.
Oh, absolutely. So it's going to be fun because we're at the two sides of it, right? From the brand side, but also from the retailer side. And I think there's a lot of growth needed on both sides of that equation. But I mean, really, I come more from the brand side, which is the JBP is never been super fun, but it's never been as difficult as it's been. And then Nate, like you're saying, with the retail media piece, it's added this whole new, I don't know, I don't want to say it's a pain, because it's not a pain, but it's a whole new thing that we have to tackle and understand. And right now, retailers, I don't necessarily think they're doing the best job of presenting what a holistic plan looks like. I don't know if you agree with that, or
I jump in and let me say, I think it's actually it's an immature process. And the truth is, retail media it's a place that is growing and trying to find its footing in a lot of ways. You're seeing, I don't know how many retail media networks cropping up all the time each year.
600 plus.
What? How many?
600 plus.
600
media networks.
Sorry
to interrupt. I thought it was a great stat.
No, but it is a great stat. And so think about that. You've got basically 600 new media businesses out there that are trying to find their footing and understand how to operate not as a seller of goods, but as a media business. And so to do that, this is really not in the DNA of a lot of retailers. And so you either need people with more experience who've done this before, who've been around the advertising or marketing landscape, or you've got to try and evolve what processes you have to try and fit this new mold as a media company. So I think the big thing is it's an immature process, and that's maybe not a nice word. So it's an evolving, it's a growing, it's a improving process. But that's the thing. It's painful, I think, because it's not there at a place where everyone looks at it and says like, oh yeah, we totally get it. It's standard. It's uniform. We've done it 100 times because there's 600 retail media networks. So you haven't done it 100 times, except if you did it in the last year. Everybody's pretty new at this. And so as they're trying to figure out what goes into it, how it should operate, that was a big thing we sought to solve. It's like, what can we do to help bring some level of basic standardization of help and guidance to retailers and brands, so they can both approach this from perspective of this is what better looks like. At least I don't even know if we got to good, better.
Yeah, better not best, right? I mean, but
Yeah.
really quick thought on that is I think immature is the right. I mean, as long as you apply it without the negative connotation, it just hasn't developed. But then we have, Amazon off the side, which in my mind, I carve out a little bit because a lot of people say, hey, they're a logistics company that happens to sell stuff. I think of it differently. I think Amazon to me was always a marketing company that happened to sell stuff. Because they were a marketing company and a media company, they transitioned into it really, really well. And they're far along now. What does that do? That means any brands that are looking at any of these other media networks are like, well, why don't you operate like them? Well, even Walmart has shown that they can't operate like Amazon. They're not just a marketing company. Walmart.com might be used that way, but it's not Walmart. It's completely different.
I think that's why JBP is so immature and challenging, because it has to be uniquely different to each of the retailers you're working with, but you have to understand the core components. And that's what Nate and I were finding in a lot of our conversations when we asked, like, how do you define JBP? Or like, what do you think about as like the key elements of JBP? It was all over the map. Like people didn't even know what their KPIs were, because I think it's one of those processes at a large organization. And I can go back to my brand days where it's like, okay, it's JBP time, fill out the template, set up the meeting, go through the motions. Cool, we did JBP, next. Like, it's always kind of been that way. But I think retailers are waking up, and because they're becoming these media companies, know they need brands more than before. And brands are realizing they need to be better partners with their retailers, so they choose them. So everyone's kind of waking up and realizing they have this process in place already, or this kind of tentpole event with joint business planning that if you just put a little bit more standardization or framework around, could be a super beneficial time. And it's around this time of the year, end of summer, where you can have these conversations that can really advance overall. But I think people are starting to wake up and realize that.
Yeah, I think there's on both sides, the retailers are expecting the brands to come in with more and, different ideas, because they're dealing with so many different media networks as a whole. Brands are looking for the retailers to come in with what they want. And then you have these two sides that I think everybody wants to do it better, but nobody
really knows.
Yeah. Well, and I'll add one more wrinkle too. You've got a more established process. That's the traditional merchandising groups at the retailer and the brand sales teams, that they still have their JBP process. And if that's completely siloed off and different, and you're not connecting it to that digital e-commerce and retail media and advertising part of it, then you're creating really different strategies within the same companies that are trying to do different things, probably not aligned. You've got spend that's going against different metrics, different KPIs, trying to accomplish different things. People who maybe are offering credits here or support there, which doesn't align to the people that actually control those things. It's like you create this cycle of confusion. And so it really is something where it can be brought together in a much more effective way.
And that was one of the questions we asked, actually, Aaron, in our research. We were like, okay, what JBP do you have? And they were like, oh, which one? And we were like, what do you mean, which one? And the brands were like, oh, well, we have a retail media JBP, and then there's like a broader business JBP. And we were like, oh, interesting. Who's involved in each of those? Totally separate teams. They don't necessarily talk to each other. And some brands even shared an anecdote where they had like sales reps who were committing to retail media spend and not telling the marketing team, and they were unaware. And so at the end of the day, they were committing to something that they actually couldn't do. And so it caused all kinds of turmoil on the P&L for the finance team, because both hands weren't talking to each other in the same organization, which cannot happen, especially because everyone's so focused on profitability right now.
Yeah, I see this. I was just laughing because I was talking to, huge CPG brand who that exact same thing just happened to. And there came out of it like, are we not involved? We're 20% of the business now. You weren't even going to have us in there. And it was basically like they were going to muddy the waters, right? That everybody wants the check mark, right? We did a JBP. Jeez.
Say that 15 times.
Yeah, I know, right? We did it. We're done, to your point, and now we're moving on. And then you have the e-com teams being like, wait a minute, I'm tied to a number too, right? And how do we do this as a whole? And then you're looking at, from everybody's trying to be omni-channel. I'm omni-channel. We're omni-channel.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe externally, internally, it's still incredibly siloed. But, if I'm on the retailer side, though, I'm literally like, stop. Where's the e-com team? Right? It goes both ways. I'd be calling back up by like the retailer and be like, why didn't you invite me in? Why did you just have it with them? They're obviously they'd say, hey, that's not our spot. You invite your side to the meeting. We invite our side to the meeting. But still, I'd have been like, where's the e-com team?
But that's fair. And like, we found more synergies between the sales teams and the merchandising teams across traditional brick and mortar and e-commerce when that was even separated. It was really between the marketing and the retail media teams that were more separated. And so I think there's an element on both sides where you need to do that prep work on your side to bring those parties together. Otherwise, you're doing yourself a disservice walking into that room or that process without having gone through the prep on your side to know what are the KPIs I'm trying to represent, that maybe that person's not in the room. And maybe there's reasons for it, plenty of reasons why you don't want a 50-person meeting to try and accomplish anything. But you've got to know what those things are you're trying to represent and work towards, and have them bought into whatever sort of guardrails you're going to operate in, and certainly looped into what the outcomes are. Because if they're on the hook for certain things, you've got to make sure you're aligned internally. And so that was a big learning and recommendation that we came out with that we really want people to take away. It's like, do that prep work internally. Our research has even a checklist you could run through of like, hey, did we do all these steps before we walk into a JBP?
And I think the other thing I'll say from the retailer side, like we asked on the retailer side, what do you wish was easier, better from the brand? And we asked the same thing to the brand, and the retailer was like, tell us who to involve. Like they are so confused about who to talk to because they don't know what the name of the role is, or they're getting reached out to by multiple functions. So they feel that tension too. And I know the brands sometimes feel that way on the retailer side, but the reason I'm saying this is both sides are siloed, right? And both need to work on this. So that whole checklist perspective, or even figuring out like, who do we want to have in the room and who do we need in the room to have this conversation? Hint, hint, please make sure it's finance. Like, please make sure that you do that beforehand, because it's felt on both sides of the fence, where I think previously brand might be pointing the finger at the retailer, and the retailer wants to understand, like, who should we involve? So tell them and be super clear about that.
I do think there's an element of like, people want to play cagey because like to a certain extent it's a negotiation. But the reality is I think you'd have way better outcomes with a bit more transparency. Like, we're not saying show all your cards right away, but there is value in providing more transparency. It's two-way dialogue. It's a joint thing. I want to give Lauren space for, she's got some great lines around joint, but like the idea is it should be something that is a lot about the communication and aligning on those joint goals. What makes sense for both of you? What is valuable to the brand that they're excited about? And what are the things that the retailer can actually offer and do? I think there's a lot to be done there that just a little more communication would go a long way towards solving.
But the joint back and joint business planning, I think that's what Nate was talking about.
Yes, that's exactly right.
But it is crazy because when you separate the team, it's funny that it only gets squirrely right when you get up to it. Because if you go to any retailer or any brand right now, they're like, oh yeah, we'd love to have everybody involved. Oh, it's going to be great. Absolutely. Oh, we're going to be overly transparent. We're going to have the right people there. We're going to do the prep ahead of time. And then everybody is so busy right now, right? We've had this trimming out of like this middle layer. So everybody's busier than they've ever been. And it's like, all of a sudden it's upon them. And they're like, oh my God, I got to get everything in place right now. And then I think that's where it starts to crumble, because I don't think there's a lot of, it's not very adversarial at all between the brands and the retailers. I think everybody wants to work together. It's just in this last moment of chaos when they finally have to do it that some of the things start to fall apart. I think the checklist thing is awesome. I mean, people would work via checklist, right? These are the things I should have in place ahead of time.
And I think the thing about e-commerce, and I always say this, here's another phrase for you, like process is not a dirty word, because I feel like people tend to like move away from the word process or like putting anything in place like that. But it's actually super relevant, specifically for something as complex as e-commerce and joint business planning. Like the way I think about it, going back to my brand days, is we had strat planning, right? That happened with the executive leadership team, and it happened at the same time every year. You would have a strat planning meeting. So you built it into your calendar. You knew when you needed to prep. You can do the same thing for JBP, like 4 or 5 months out. Remember, this is when this needs to start. Start having the internal conversations. And Aaron, I know we're both a huge fan of Todd Hassenfeld, so big shout out to him. He had an amazing quote in our research about how e-commerce needs to be the conductor of the orchestra. Like, they really need to help define what the sheet music looks like and kind of bring the right people in and make sure that every single team has a job starting 4 to 5 months out. And then it's just a cadence that happens every year. So to your point, it's not like JBP is happening tomorrow. Like, what do we do? Build this into your process and start putting those pieces in place so that you don't get to the end and not have a successful JBP.
So who's the conductor then?
What Todd was recommending is that e-commerce is usually, the e-commerce team is usually the one that's kind of helping to orchestrate this, because they see more broadly across all of the different functions. And they understand that e-commerce needs to be included as well as brick and mortar and look at it from an omni-channel perspective. That's not always the case in every brand, but that was just a suggestion.
Well, and I think part of that comes from the fact that, like, regardless of what the end of the day KPIs are for the different teams, I think what everyone's trying to do is drive sales. And that is the ultimate goal of all these teams. They all would say, yes, we want to drive sales. And so what e-commerce can typically do, or if there's sort of an all up, sales team, what they can do is look at, okay, how do we make sure we're driving towards the ultimate end right goal, which is sales, growth. I mean, whether it's category sales, brand sales, like those are all metrics that everybody wants to see. They want to see any marketing dollars go towards driving incredible ROI and return on ad spend for ideally both the retailer and the brand through that channel.
Yeah. I'm also thinking like the e-com team is usually, in a lot of cases, the ones that are most adept to change. Mm-hmm. I mean, in a lot of cases, that's the person who took a gamble from the traditional brick and mortar 5-6 years ago, right? And it's like, hey, I'm comfortable with the unknown and trying new things. And that's not to say nobody else, but it's just, I think there's a higher percentage of those people on the e-com teams as a whole. And I think kind of what we're getting at is, I mean, Nate, you said at the beginning, it's an immature process. You have to be uncomfortable with the fact that it's not perfected. It's not perfect anywhere close to it, but we're going to get better year over year. And if we can take the data and not just, I think this is like where a lot of the winning brands win, especially early on, is they were looking at data and making changes based on the data, not the personal feelings around, hey, I like this content better than that one. This read better. It's what actually worked, what didn't work. And I can go with that. And if my hypothesis was originally wrong, it was wrong. So be it. I at least got to the best answer. And so, yeah, I guess for right now, I don't know long term if it should always be the e-com team, but in the interim, the team's just going to want to go figure out the unknown and get it in place is to a better state. That's probably it.
Well, and it's a process that, like Lauren said, should be something that you look at. You can evolve the process too. It'll get better. And I think you will see over time more of these functions start to come together where, like, you're not going to have a merchant or a sales team that just focuses on e-com versus in-store. Those are going to come together. You're going to have marketing teams that more and more have all up sales goals, not necessarily just sales goals for the marketing spend that they have. And so as those things come together, I think processes will evolve. I also think that's going to be a forced function that is forced by more scarcity. If marketing budgets aren't growing a ton and you're going to have to be more efficient with your resources, there's going to be more pressure to say, are you driving the all up business goals? And I think we're seeing that in the market right now. I think we can probably expect to continue to see that happen. And so as that happens, there will be that pressure. And so, both from the brand and the retailer side, you want to be more efficient, more effective with what you're doing, like embrace these processes, embrace the immaturity to say, let's bring definition here that's going to serve us and take a bet in a few areas. Like, is there innovation that you can get people to sign on to? Because, right now everybody's willing to go for it. And maybe you've got enough extra room in there to squeeze some kind of like fun activation, an extra, set of audiences that you wouldn't normally target, like whatever it is, take a chance on some of that stuff while it's developing and get everybody aligned that, we are together, embrace that process and lead the change.
And I think you talked about data, Aaron. I think that's a huge piece of it, right? Retailers, they want to know what they don't know. And so we heard that a lot in our research, where they also want to hear about the insights and the data that the brands have about the category. I know there's always the need for brands to have more data, especially from the retail media side, about where their ad spend dollars are going. So that's super relevant. And yes, retailers should still focus on that. But something that came out of a lot of our conversations with retailers was, we want to hear from brands, like, tell us what you know about the category. Tell us what you know about the shopper, because the more transparent, I think that's the theme here, that the brand can be, the better they can have those conversations, to Nate's point, around innovative ideas, around test and learn approaches, because retailers want to distinguish themselves from other retailers. And how do you do that? Unique, cool, interesting things. And if you as a brand have insights around what a shopper might want, or how they're shopping, or how your category is evolving, that's a really strong partnership. And 9 times out of 10, the retailer will raise their hand to partner with you because you are sharing that data. So I think the data piece is really important both ways, where I think sometimes there's a finger pointing at the retailer that they need to provide more, which I'm not denying. There's definitely an opportunity for more of that. But the brand should also be providing more to the retailer as well.
Yeah. And maybe even just to kind of take that a little bit further, is like, as you think about the data and the sharing and transparency, it doesn't have to be something that just happens in this one meeting and an annual basis. It's like, this is a process. And if you start by being pretty transparent about what your goals are and aligning to what success looks like, you should be revisiting this and saying, well, are we achieving our goals? Are we driving the sales we talked about? Are we hitting those metrics that we all aligned on? And if not, the JBP process is also a mechanism you can say, well, let's shift tactics then. Let's try something different. Let's move a little bit of our investment over here or over there, and try to do things that are still going to meet those overall goals for everybody. But we're all going to feel better about it at the end of the day, because we've looked at the data and said, whatever we started with committing to, maybe that wasn't the best thing. It felt like, that was going to be the right audience, that right activation. And now we're out of holiday and we think we need to pivot. So do that. Use the JBP as a way to do that.
No, I totally agree with you. Both sides have to have the openness to say, hey, I was wrong, and that's cool. We made a mistake together. Let's shift, let's pivot, and let's make the most of the rest of the year. Other thing that I was just thinking about while both of you were talking, Nate and Lauren, about data and using it and what each side can bring, the maturity of the process, and us being able to almost shape it now, right? If you're on the brand side and you ever not like something around the JBP, now's the time, because retailers are open to reevaluating the whole process around, how do we make this work for both sides? I'm jumping in with the opportunity to help reshape it that's best for me and my brand, my company as a whole. That's exciting for me, right? Because for the longest time it was brands participated, right? But retailers held a lot of the power, and now that's kind of shifting back along with the data and the knowledge piece.
Well, and as a brand, you've been in the media game longer, almost certainly, than your retailer partners, and they are looking for help and direction. And so embrace that. You want a retailer to operate in a certain way? Tell them this is what good looks like. This is what we want to see. And I think brands would be surprised at how open retailers are to saying, cool, we'll do it that way. Because again, it's an immature process that's developing. They're trying to figure it out. In a lot of cases, they're like, here's a starting point where we feel like it's already going to change for next year. And we heard that as they talked about it, where they were saying, we started this way, we've done it this way a few times, we're expecting to change it for next year because we know it's not there yet. As a brand, you can insert yourself and say hey, we want to see this. We're one of your big advertisers, or even we're an innovative testing partner who you care about. Let's do something different, and let's change the JBP to look this way and do something a little different for us. And I think retailers are going to be open to that. And you can help take the JBP process maybe out of where it is, if it's painful today, to something that looks a little better. Like, own that, and you might find yourself something you actually really love. I mean, it could be a great way to drive the business.
Yeah, and I don't think it matters the size of your company. So we interviewed large CPG companies, medium size, smaller size brands, and some of the feedback we heard from some of the smaller brands was that they might not be able to get an audience with the retailer. But other smaller brands said, oh, we leverage our small size to be able to work with the retailer. And we say, hey, we have this really great insight about our category, and we're the only ones that can give this to you. And we can quickly test and learn where maybe some of these other big players can't. So I would also say for any brands listening, leverage your size. There's positives and negatives to being big or small, right? If you're big, obviously you've been around for a really long time. You have the brand name, you have the money, you have all of that behind you. But if you're a small brand, you can come out with some really great insights, be even more transparent, and be willing to partner. And you'll get a lot more audience with your retailers because, to Nate and to Aaron, to your point, everybody wants to test and learn. They want to try new things, and they want to get ahead, and they want to be differentiated. And they can do that a lot faster with some of the smaller, medium-sized brands. So I just say that because don't get discouraged if you're not a large CPG company with millions of dollars to spend on retail media or to work with your retailer partner. We found that on the opposite side, you can also do a lot of work and really make JBP efficient for you.
What I love about the report too is, and even the stuff we're pulling out, is everybody thinks everybody else is doing it better than they are.
Yes.
Right? Everybody's just looking internally like, we're all jacked up. We're totally jacked up. Everybody else has got it figured out. Do you think there's like a little niche here, right? For like a Chris and an Oscar to jump in and create like a JBP, like a little task force, right? For some reason, large companies, what's that?
They have like a JBP training, actually.
No, they totally need it just once a year. That's awesome. You bring them in, help us, because when large companies, you can ask internally, and you can have the smartest people, like literally have Einstein, right, inside on your mathematics and data team, but he won't know anything. But if you bring an outside consultant in, hey, everybody listens, right?
Oh my God, the least favorite thing about working at a brand, I could say it 10 times. If I got one random person off the street to say it, it was like, yes.
Yes, this is exactly it. You bring in Chris, you bring in Oscar, they sit down, they crunch through it, they put some organization to it, they train it, they got a little document, they back it up, they give Nate here, Lauren, a royalty on the back end, they base it off the research you did. I can see that actually a lot of companies would just love for that to happen. Just come in. I'll be reassured if you at least let me know that I'm on par with everybody else. And then I'm Chris and Oscar. I'm like, actually, you guys are way ahead. Just make him feel good as I leave.
I think Chris will like this. I'm going to kind of give a shout out. They're doing a JBP summit in August. It's going to be like a half-day summit where they're going to talk about like, how do you think about joint business planning? How do you do this better in your organization, and bring in different elements of it? So shout out for First Mover. They do have something coming up in August.
Yeah. Everybody check out First Mover. Chris and Oscar are awesome.
They're great.
Awesome. And there's no E in Mover, just MOVR, right? So everybody, we'll give them a shout out. And I've had Chris and Oscar on the podcast. I should have them back and let them kind of promote that, because brands 100% need it. And retailers would love for brands to do it. 100%.
Yes.
Retailers need it too. And I think the statement you made around everybody thinks everybody else is doing it better absolutely came through.
Yes.
But honestly, we were in these interviews with retailers and brands as well. And they asked us, so what are you hearing? What are you finding out? Tell us what else everyone else.
Tell us more.
Yeah. And like, that was frankly, like, they all wanted to know what everyone else was doing well, how they were doing it, what they were learning, through this. Like, share amongst your colleagues too. I think that's the transparency. Doesn't just have to be in the JBP process. Like, talk to other people in the industry. There's a lot to be learned. And I think we can just lift everybody's process, help retailers be more like media companies, be good media partners, and evolve this thing into a place that it is a better process for everybody.
I'm still stuck. I actually want to sit in on one of Chris and Oscar's things. That's what I want to do. I'll have to ping him.
Gotta look at the one in August.
Yeah. Are there, I mean, I think that's the key one. Right? Everybody thinks they're perpetually behind, but brands I'm talking to, they're all in the same boat. And I think they need to jump in and take more of a leadership position. That's even what I'm hearing with you, Nate, right? Take the leadership position. Yeah. There's nobody that's grabbing the reins. There's nobody that's captaining the boat right now. And in that, it's like everybody's afraid of doing something wrong, and afraid of doing something wrong, they do nothing. And that's really the only thing in e-commerce is that's the wrong thing to do, is to do nothing.
Yeah.
It's the 100%. Only wrong thing to do, because you're not learning. Even if you do the wrong thing, you at least learn.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I'll steal this from the report, but like we lay this out that like everyone needs to feel they have a role in the JBP process. There's all these different teams that right now may be involved, may not be involved, may hear about it later. Like, again, Lauren mentioned finance, like they're an important player you should be including ahead of time. And then all of these players need to come together beforehand, collaborate, and they need to come to the table ready for that collaboration, whether you're doing a huge prep of all the players internally ahead of time and then coming to the table, bringing a lot of them to the table between the brand and the retailer, like come to the table ready for that collaboration. But everyone needs to know what they're doing there, what their voice is. And they need to understand the process and the timelines. Like, is the time to weigh in an internal thing beforehand? When you're getting to the table, how long are we thinking this is going to last and take? And where are points of adding that feedback? And align on what those expectations are. Be clear about what we're working towards internally and with your counterpart across the table. Because if you're aligned on, hey, we want to drive gross sales, great. Then let's all talk about how we're going to make sure that's what we're driving towards and not just, one person's quota.
And I love that point, Nate, around like bringing all the different functions. I mentioned finance, but like revenue growth management, RGM, to have a revenue growth management team, they should be involved in this process because they're helping you identify which SKUs you should prioritize online. I'm quick teaser for the next DSI research project. I'm doing one on e-commerce category management. That's a huge element of this. How can you bring insight to your retailer about your category, where brands are actually collaborating with retailers to say, hey, consumers can't find my product because you have the wrong taxonomy. You don't have the right filters on your site. So why don't we have that conversation during joint business planning so that we can influence the overall category, help you as a retailer, help us as a brand, and then be your trusted leader the next time something like this happens, or come back to you and say, here's some new insight I found from the research. I think about category captaincy, and I'm air quoting here because I know that's a broader discussion. There's some complexities to that. From an e-commerce standpoint, put on that type of hat, right? Say to your retailer, this is what we know about our category. This is what we know about how our consumers shop. What are you hearing? How can we look at it holistically and create a plan that everybody wins? It's really just everybody needs to think about a rising tide lifts all ships instead of like we're headbutting against each other to try and fight. Yeah. We all need to be in this together. And if we aren't, then nobody will win. So I think that is the big theme we saw out of this research. It's what I'm seeing in some of my new research projects. And I think people are starting to get that. But to your point, Aaron, the more you as a brand can take the reins and really do that, you'll get further faster.
It just had me even thinking about how many, as brands, how many of us have like totally, just totally destroyed it on a month on sales, but it's on the two products that have 1% or, negative margin, right? Yeah. Like, oh, we're through the roof. And I think those are some of those key things that you're talking about from a revenue growth management, like in bringing in the finance team. Like, let's do a holistic overview of the entire catalog. What products do we actually want to sell? Right? Because it's really fun at the end. We're like, oh, it's a loss leader. You don't get to call loss leader afterwards, right? That's not strategy, right? That's you're standing at the front if you're doing it and you know what you're doing, but you can't just do it afterwards because the price has dropped. But I mean, then
like
again,
baking the bread without the yeast. Like, yeah. You know what I mean? Like you just can't do it.
But then with that, you can arm then the marketing team. These are the products we want to focus on. These are the new launches that are coming up. This is what our profit margin tolerance is. Like, there's all those things that have to be And again, like the retailer doesn't know these things, right? I mean, maybe they do if you overshare.
They may say, I want to push these products because I need more density in this category, which is your loss leaders. And so they're going to emphasize those. But if you haven't aligned internally, you may not come armed to be like, yeah, but those are negative margin for us. We don't have any interest in pushing those. So no thanks.
Yeah, then you get people on the side like, let's go. They want to partner. They want to grow they want to triple our sales this year. Like, oh, so we're putting $3 on the top of everything we ship out instead of just $2.
Omnichannel.
Relaying my brand life.
Yeah. I will never forget the brand story real fast. I led the digital shelf at J&J, and I came in, and I didn't even know how to spell e-commerce. Like I just had to like learn it from the get-go. And it took me probably about like 4 or 5 months to even find out that we had an e-commerce category management team. Like we were just on literally opposite sides of the building. We just never talked to each other until someone was like, oh, you should connect with that team. And then once we did, we put so many dots together and everything kind of fell into place. But that is a very natural occurrence in an organization. So the more you can try to figure out who those functions are, or use our report or something like our research to say, do I have these functions in my org? Let me go reach out to them. Like look for RGM, look for category management, like bring them into the conversation. It's super important.
Mm-hmm. I even like the cross-functional teams from the different sales channels. That's one of the things I went through. It's like, I had Amazon, but I'm calling up the Walmart team, the sales team, like, hey, there's all the data I got. This is what I'm focusing on. What are you guys doing? Like, let's think about this holistically as a company. Like, here's my JBP. What does yours look like? Like, do these overlap? Do they align? Are we making sense? Oh, I didn't even think about that product. Do you want me to push it? Do I not push it? Those are all kinds of conversations that I think now are easier to have than they were, 8, 9 years ago when everything, the whole Walmart team was, we hate Amazon. They're stealing all of our business. But that's
everything needs to work together in order to be successful. I mean, we were talking about Megan beforehand, but Megan Caroon from Clear Data, she talks about this a lot. Like you need to understand your holistic retail media spend. You need to understand your holistic product portfolio. You need to understand your category across every retailer. So if you don't have a cross-functional omnichannel team that's meeting at least monthly to talk about these things, whether it's with the e-commerce sales, marketing, shopper marketing, you're really missing out on a lot of those conversations. And it starts with that, right? I know it sounds like another meeting on the calendar, but if you have that meeting, then you discover so many insights. And then you can change the processes, you can change the strategies, you can kind of build it in to your broader approach, but it all starts with just connecting the dots between the teams.
Sure. I'm still shaking my head at the 600 retail media networks.
Plus, there's a plus sign, Aaron, 600.
Yeah. So many.
Everybody has a retail media network.
Everybody just thinks they want it to get simpler, and it just keeps getting more complicated, right? Just keeps getting more complicated. I mean, I have to do a whole podcast on, we talked so much about third-party cookies Google's cookies going away, and then they just announced they're not going away.
Back to the drawing board.
It's like the boy who cried wolf. Like, that's how I feel. I'm like, just like, I'm going to stop talking about this.
Well, I just think nobody ever did anything about it. And if Google just shut them off, I think there's like a lot of revenue absolutely lost. And like, as long as nobody's ever, after 3 years of saying they're going away, 4 years, I don't know. Nobody forget it. We'll just leave them out there.
Yeah.
What didn't we cover today as we kind of get to the end? We've been riffing for a while. Any other like key things from the report that you might want to pull out?
I mean, I'll give a plug, like read the report. I am hoping it'll be a link here, Aaron, that's easily accessible to our listeners. In there, we've got that checklist we talked about a few times. We've got a boilerplate template you could use if you need some PowerPoint slides. Like we tried to give some really tangible tools for folks to use to really help take the process at least a little bit further, make it a little bit better, give you some things that are actionable that help you really make your process simpler, easier, more standardized. And frankly, they're a starting point. If anyone has thoughts on why that's terrible or didn't work, we would love to know that. And we would be more than happy to do something to like help drive this in the industry.
Yeah,
I'm sure,
I would agree.
Without a doubt, on the LinkedIn post and on the podcast page, we'll make sure that we have that link. We'll have that link on there for sure. Without a doubt.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I think the only other thing I was going to say is I think it's really important that you start having these conversations, and it's a perfect time. Like right now, it's August, September timeframe. That's JBP planning. Like it is a little bit late. There should have maybe been some pre-work, but like take the checklist, figure out, are the functions that you needed involved? Are you having the right conversations? Like test it out now, see if it works. And we would love to hear from you. What other questions you might have for retailers, or if a retailer is listening, what questions you might have for brands. This is an ongoing conversation and it needs to continue to be. So we hope this is just the catalyst to really kind of kick that off.
Yeah, it makes me think, what was the best time to have that meeting? Yesterday.
Yeah,
What's
yes.
the next best time? Today.
But
right now.
Tomorrow's always better than next year.
Yeah.
I like that. New phrase.
That's awesome. Well, Nate, Lauren, this has been absolutely fantastic. We have to do this again. Like anytime you guys do a report, we have to do a recap like this because it's way, way, way too much fun. So thanks again for all your support, for your friendship. And with that, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Digital Deep Dive. Thanks everybody for listening in. Thanks, Nate. Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you.